The millionaire's daughter suddenly lost her hearing, until one boy pulled something from her ear that shocked every doctor. That August day was the happiest one in Isabella Sterling's life. The sun glittered over the turquoise water, her father's white yacht swayed on gentle waves, and the 10-year-old girl in a bright pink swimsuit was getting ready for another dive off the side. "Bella, be careful," her mother, Catherine Sterling, shouted from the upper deck, but the girl just waved and jumped in. The water wrapped around her with its coolness. Isabella opened her eyes behind her mask and froze in awe. Tiny silver fish swam around her, and colorful stones shimmered on the ocean floor. She dove deeper, studying the underwater world, when suddenly something bumped into her side. The girl jerked sharply, hit her shoulder against the yacht's hull, and her mask slipped off her face. At that moment she felt a strange tickling in her right ear, as if water had gotten inside. "Before we continue, tell us what city you're from. It's important for us to know where our stories reach." Isabella surfaced, coughed out water, and swam to the ladder. Her ear felt slightly clogged, but she didn't give it much thought. It was normal after diving. An hour later they returned to the old harbor, and that evening the whole family had dinner at an expensive restaurant on the waterfront. The next morning Isabella woke up and realized she could barely hear anything with her right ear. Sounds came through as if through cotton, muffled and distant. "Mom, my ear feels blocked," she said over breakfast. Catherine frowned. "Probably some water got in. Hop on one foot, it'll come out." Isabella jumped, but it didn't help. Then they used some drops they found in the first aid kit. By evening it was worse. Now she couldn't hear anything at all in her right ear. Her father, Richard Sterling, owner of the region's largest fishing company, didn't hesitate. An hour later they were sitting in the office of the best ENT specialist in the city. Dr. Miller, a man in his 50s with graying temples, examined Isabella with an otoscope and frowned. "There's something in there," he muttered. "A foreign object. Deep. Very deep." "What do you mean, a foreign object?" Richard leaned forward. "What is it?" "I can't say for sure. She needs a CT scan." 2 days later the results were ready. The doctors gathered for a consultation. 3 specialists studied the images and shook their heads. "It looks like a piece of sea sponge," said one of the doctors, Dr. Reynolds. "A very rare case. A sponge got into the ear canal and swelled from the moisture. It's now pressed tightly against the eardrum." "What can we do?" Richard's voice was tense. "Surgery. But it's extremely risky. The sponge is a millimeter away from the eardrum. One wrong move, and your daughter could lose hearing in that ear forever." Catherine turned pale and grabbed her husband's hand. "And if we don't operate," she whispered, "the sponge will keep pressing on the eardrum. Inflammation, infection, sooner or later, intervention will be necessary." Richard clenched his jaw in silence. Then he asked, "What are the chances of success?" Dr. Miller sighed. "Honestly? 50-50. I've done similar procedures, but sponge is unpredictable. It might crumble during extraction, fragments can remain inside, and infection can follow." "No," Richard said sharply. "We're not taking that risk. Find another way." The next 4 months the family traveled between clinics. New York, Boston, then Switzerland, Mayo Clinic. Everywhere doctors said the same thing: surgery was possible, but the risks were enormous. Some suggested laser removal, others endoscopy, but none could guarantee safety. Isabella got used to living with hearing in only one ear. At school she had to change seats. She now sat where she could hear the teacher with her left ear. She asked classmates to repeat things when they spoke to her from the right. She stopped wearing headphones. Music sounded lopsided, wrong. She quit violin lessons she once adored. Without full hearing the melody lost its soul. But that wasn't what hurt the most. What broke her heart was the look on her mother's face. Catherine walked around with red eyes, blaming herself, whispering, "I insisted on that trip? I didn't watch her." Her father became irritable, snapped at employees, spent hours in his office calling medical experts. "And I promise you, by the end of this story you will learn the shocking truth about that day on the yacht, what really happened when Isabella dove underwater. What her mother had been hiding for months, and what will change everything you thought about this family." But for now Isabella just lived. She studied, read books, walked along the waterfront with her nanny. And during one of those walks, her life changed again. 4 months is not a long time, but for a 10-year-old girl it felt like forever. Isabella learned to exist in a world where half the sounds had disappeared, as if they had never existed. The private academy, where children of senators and corporate owners studied, became a challenge. She sat by the window, positioned so that her left ear faced the teacher. Every time someone spoke to her from the right, she had to turn her whole head. It looked strange, awkward. "Isabella, can you hear me?" her classmate Tiffany asked during recess. The girl spun around sharply. "What?" I said, "are you coming with us to the mall after school?" "No, thank you." Isabella turned back to the window. Tiffany shrugged and walked over to the other girls. Isabella saw her whisper something, and they all glanced at her with pity. Those looks were what she hated most. The worst part was having to ask people to repeat themselves. In the cafeteria, when her friends talked about something, she often missed half the conversation. She had to ask them to repeat it, and every time she saw that slight irritation in their eyes. Little by little, Isabella grew quiet. It was easier to nod and smile, pretending she understood. Music disappeared from her life completely. The violin she had loved since she was 6 now stood in the corner, gathering dust. Isabella tried to play several times, but each attempt ended in frustration. The sound was incomplete, distorted, she heard only half the notes. The melody fell apart. After the third attempt, she closed the case and never touched it again. Teachers treated her differently now. In music class, Mrs. Higgins always spoke to her in an overly gentle tone. "Isabella, are you comfortable? Maybe you'd like to sit closer?" "I'm fine," Isabella replied dryly. "If you miss something, don't hesitate to ask again, all right?" That excessive carefulness, the softness in their voices, the constant questions about how she felt, it irritated her more than the hearing loss itself. Isabella didn't want to be a fragile vase. Home wasn't easier. Her mother, Catherine, had become a shadow of herself. Once a successful, perfectly put-together woman, she now sat around in a robe, taking herbal drops, repeating the same words. "It's my fault," she whispered into the air. "Catherine, stop," Richard said wearily. It was an accident. Richard had changed too. Once calm and rational, he had become quick-tempered. Isabella overheard him shouting into the phone. "I don't care about the risks. I'll pay $100,000. 200. Name your price, for God's sake." He slammed the phone down each time another specialist abroad refused to guarantee results. He snapped at employees. Once Isabella walked into his office and saw him sitting with his head in his hands. She quietly stepped out so he wouldn't notice. The family was falling apart. Her parents barely spoke. Her mother cried at night, and her father stayed late at work. Isabella understood, it was because of her. Because of a tiny piece of sea sponge in her ear. She spent more and more time alone. Reading on the balcony, staring out at the ocean she once loved but now hated. Walking with her nanny, Sarah, silently nodding at her attempts to make conversation. "Isabella, look at those beautiful yachts," Sarah would say, pointing to the water. The girl didn't even turn her head. For months passed. For endless months of a half-silent world and a family slowly falling apart. And Isabella had begun to accept that this might be her life forever. That day, Sarah suggested they change their walking route. "Isabella, let's skip the waterfront today and go to the old harbor instead. It's quieter, fewer people." Isabella shrugged. She didn't care. The old harbor greeted them with a completely different world. Here it smelled of fish, salt, machine oil, the scent of real work. Fishermen in rubber boots were mending nets, unloading their catch, shouting over one another. Peeling boats rocked at the docks, and seagulls circled overhead. Isabella walked along the creaking wooden planks, looking around absently. It was a life she had never seen, no security, no expensive cars, no people in suits. She noticed a boy sitting on an overturned crate next to a pile of nets. He was about 12, tan, wearing a faded blue t-shirt and worn jeans, barefoot. His hands moved quickly and skillfully through the net, tying knots. An older man stood beside him, explaining something. Isabella stopped, watching them work. The boy's movements were precise, confident. His hands were covered in calluses and scratches, yet his fingers worked with surprising delicacy. The boy looked up, sensing her gaze, and their eyes met. He didn't look away like her classmates did. He just looked at her calmly and attentively. Then he stood and walked over. Instinctively, Isabella turned her left ear toward him. The movement had become automatic. The boy noticed immediately and frowned. "You don't hear well?" he asked directly, without hesitation. Isabella flushed. "That's none of your business." "Just asking," he shrugged. "You keep turning the same ear toward people." "So what?" Sarah took Isabella by the hand. "Isabella, let's go, you shouldn't be talking to." But the boy crouched down to be at her eye level and said, "My grandpa taught me how to pull hooks out of fish gills." Sometimes they get stuck deep, and the fish suffers. You look the same, like something stuck deep inside, right? Isabella froze. How did he know? The doctors say it's a sponge, she blurted out. A sea sponge. But they're afraid to remove it. They say they might damage the eardrum. Caleb nodded as if it were nothing unusual. A clinging sponge. I know that type. It sticks and swells. You can't just pull it out, it'll tear everything. First you soften it, then break the vacuum, and then remove it at the right angle. Are you a doctor? Isabella asked skeptically. No. But I've worked with fish since I was 6. I've taken hooks, seaweed, even little stones out of fish ears. My hands are tough, he showed his calloused palms, but my fingers are precise. Sarah gasped. Isabella, don't listen to him. This is ridiculous. Doctors study for years, and what have the doctors done? Isabella cut her off sharply. Nothing. They just talk, and nothing changes. She looked at the boy. Something in his calmness, in his quiet confidence, made her believe him. What's your name? Caleb. And yours? Isabella. She hesitated. And you really think you can try? I can. But first I need to look. And I need a tool, a thin wire with a bent tip. I have one. I made it myself for work. No, Isabella. Sarah cried in fear. Your father will kill me. This is dangerous. But the girl had already made up her mind. For months of doctors, exams, fear. For months of watching her family fall apart. She was tired. Tired of waiting, hoping for a miracle. Call my dad, she said firmly to her nanny. Tell him where we are. Tell him I want this boy to try. Isabella, this is madness. Call him, the girl shouted, and her voice carried such determination that the nanny pulled out her phone with trembling hands. Caleb stood quietly beside them, looking out at the water. He didn't rush her, didn't persuade her. He simply waited. While Sarah nervously dialed Richard's number, Caleb sat down on a crate and motioned for Isabella to sit beside him. She lowered herself onto the rough wood, still barely believing what was happening. Listen, the boy began calmly, I work with fish every day. Since I was 6. My dad takes me out on the boat. We set the nets, pull in the catch. And you know what happens a lot? Fish swallow hooks too deep. Or something gets stuck in their gills, seaweed, little stones, sometimes bits of shell. Isabella listened, turned toward him with her left ear. And what do? I take it out. If we need to release the fish alive, I have to get everything out gently. My grandpa taught me the technique. The key is a thin tool, the right angle, and patience. You can't rush, ever. He pulled a small wire with a hooked tip from his pocket. See? I made it myself. It's thin but strong. The end is smooth, not sharp, so it doesn't damage tissue. Isabella took the wire and turned it in her hands. The craftsmanship really was careful. And you've seen this sponge before? Of course. A clinging sponge. It sticks to rocks on the ocean floor, to boat hulls. It holds on by vacuum. If you try to rip it off by force, it either tears or pulls off a piece of whatever it's attached to. So how do you remove it? She leaned closer. You break the vacuum. My grandpa showed me. First you soften the sponge with warm oil, olive oil or any vegetable oil. It loosens a bit. Then you carefully slide the tool under it, at the right angle, so air gets between the sponge and the surface. The vacuum breaks, and it comes off. Then you can pull it out. Isabella frowned. But an ear isn't a rock. There's the eardrum, nerves. That's why precision matters, Caleb said, looking at his hands. I've taken hooks out of fish gills. Everything there is fragile too, one wrong move and the fish dies. I've pulled things out of tighter spaces than an ear. I can do this. His voice carried no bragging. Only the calm confidence of someone who knew what he was doing. At that moment, a black SUV screeched to a stop at the pier. Richard jumped out before the engine even stopped and raced toward his daughter. Isabella. What happened? Sarah said something about. He stopped short when he saw the boy in worn clothes sitting beside his daughter. Dad, this is Caleb, Isabella said as she jumped up. He can remove the sponge from my ear. Richard looked at the boy, then at his daughter, then at the nanny. Sarah, have you lost your mind? What are you even talking about? Caleb rose calmly, straightened up, and looked the man in the eye. I can help your daughter. I know how to remove sea sponges without damaging tissue. You? Richard's voice dripped with undisguised disdain. You're a boy who fixes fishing nets. We've been to the best clinics in the world, world-renowned professors examined her, and you think. Dad, listen to him. Isabella grabbed her father's hand. Please. Isabella, no, Richard stroked her head. It's dangerous. This boy doesn't understand what he's dealing with. I do, Caleb said firmly. I understand that if nothing is done, your daughter won't get better. Doctors are afraid to try because they're afraid to make a mistake and ruin their reputation. I'm not afraid, because I have nothing to lose. And I know how to do this. Richard looked him up and down for a long moment. If you damage her ear even a little, Dad, please. Isabella stepped between them, tears streaming down her face. Doctors didn't give any guarantees either. They said 50-50. At least Caleb is sure he can. And I'm tired of waiting. I'm tired of watching Mom cry, of you snapping at everyone. I'm tired of living like this. Her voice cracked. Richard froze, staring at his daughter. He had never seen her like this, desperate, determined, on the edge. Isabella. Let him try, she whispered. Please. Richard covered his face with his hands, then slowly lowered them and looked at Caleb. If she feels worse, if she feels even the slightest pain, you stop immediately. Understood? Understood, the boy nodded. And I will stand right here. Every second. All right? Caleb turned to Isabella and smiled at her for the first time, a simple, open smile. Shall we start? He asked them to bring olive oil and a clean cloth from the nearest store. Richard silently sent the security guard who had been waiting in the car. While the guard was gone, the boy rinsed his tool in seawater, then wiped it with a clean rag his father had given him from the workshop. Sit here, he said, pointing to a higher crate so he could work comfortably. Isabella sat, her heart pounding so hard it felt ready to burst. Sarah stood beside her, pale as a sheet, clutching a handkerchief. Richard stood behind them, his face carved in stone. The guard returned with the oil. Caleb opened the bottle, poured some onto his palm, and rubbed it between his fingers, checking the texture. Then he carefully scooped a little onto his fingertip. Tilt your head to the left, he said. Isabella tilted it. Her hands trembled, and she clenched them into fists. It'll feel warm, not hot, Caleb warned. It might tickle a little, but it won't hurt. All right? Yes, she whispered. He gently dripped the warm oil into her right ear. Isabella flinched, the strange warmth spread inside, ticklish and unfamiliar. Now stay like this for 15 minutes. The oil needs to soften the sponge. Time dragged painfully slow. Richard kept trying to say something but held himself back. Sarah quietly sobbed into her handkerchief. Caleb stood calmly, looking out at the sea, only his fingers moving slightly as he handled the wire tool, apparently his way of staying steady. Finally, 15 minutes passed. Good, Caleb said, stepping closer. Now comes the most important part. You must sit absolutely still. Completely. Even if it feels uncomfortable. Can you do that? I can, Isabella swallowed. Give me your hand, sweetheart, Sarah said, offering her palm. Isabella clung to it. Caleb lifted the wire tool, brought it to her ear, and paused, aiming. His face grew focused, brows drawn, lips pressed tight. He inhaled, exhaled, and his hand began to move. The wire slid into her ear. Isabella squeezed her eyes shut. Richard stepped forward, but Caleb didn't flinch, all his attention was on the tips of his fingers. He moved the tool millimeter by millimeter, feeling every bit of resistance. Isabella felt pressure inside her ear, then a faint tingling. Easy, Caleb whispered. Almost there. A minute passed. 2. His hand remained completely steady, only his fingers making tiny adjustments to the angle. Then he stopped entirely. There it is. I can feel it. He shifted the angle slightly, and Isabella jerked at the sharp sensation, not pain, but something shifting deep inside. Hold on just a little longer, Caleb said tensely. Breaking the vacuum. Slowly, incredibly slowly, he began to pull. Isabella felt something inside her ear yielding, releasing. Sarah squeezed her hand so tightly her knuckles turned white. It's coming, Caleb exhaled. It's coming. Another millimeter. And another. Richard wasn't breathing, staring at the tip of the wire slowly emerging from his daughter's ear. And then, a dark brown mass the size of a pea appeared on the end. Caleb pulled it out completely and froze, holding it in front of him. All done. At that moment Isabella gasped. At first everything sounded muffled, as if her ear were stuffed with cotton. Then she began to hear faint, distant noises. And a few seconds later, the world exploded with sound. She heard everything. The cries of seagulls. The splash of water against the pier. The fishermen shouting in the distance. The creak of the wooden planks. Her father's breath. Sarah's sobs. I can hear, she whispered. I can hear. Then louder. Dad. I can hear. I can hear you. Tears streamed down her face. She jumped up, turned her right ear toward her father, and heard him exhale shakily. Richard fell to his knees right on the dirty wooden planks and hugged his daughter so tightly she could barely breathe. God, his voice trembled. Oh God. Isabella cried into his shoulder. Then she turned to Caleb, still holding the dark brown sponge in his hand, and ran to him. Thank you, she sobbed. Thank you so much. She threw her arms around him, and the boy awkwardly patted her back. You're welcome. I just did what I know how to do. Richard stood up, wiped his eyes, and walked over to Caleb. He held out his hand. I'm sorry for doubting you. You performed a miracle. Caleb shook his hand with his calloused palm. No miracle. Just experience and patience. Richard couldn't take his eyes off him. This boy in worn jeans and a faded t-shirt, barefoot, smelling of fish and saltwater, had done what professors with international reputations couldn't. The best clinics in Europe and the US, and he had simply taken that sponge out. How much? Richard asked abruptly, pulling out his wallet. Name the amount. I'll pay whatever you want. Caleb shook his head. I don't want money. What do you mean you don't want money? Richard frowned. You did something priceless for us. You gave my daughter her hearing back. I just wanted to try, the boy shrugged. I've never worked with a human ear before, only fish. I'm glad I could help. Richard froze, wallet still in hand. He was used to a world where everything had a price. Any problem, any service, any person, everything could be paid for. And this boy was turning down money. Just like that. At least let me buy you new clothes, shoes, he said, looking over Caleb's worn outfit. Or help your family. We have everything we need, Caleb smiled. My dad earns well from fishing. We're not rich, but we're not struggling. Isabella wiped her tears and took her father's hand. Dad, can I be friends with Caleb? Can I come here to the harbor? Richard looked at his daughter. Her eyes were glowing. For the first time in 4 months he saw curiosity instead of sorrow. Of course you can, he nodded, then turned to Caleb. If you don't mind, of course. Why would I mind? The boy smiled at Isabella. Come whenever you want. I'll show you how we work. From that day on, everything changed. Isabella began visiting the old harbor almost every day after school. At first Sarah accompanied her, but later Richard allowed her to go alone. The harbor was a safe place, and all the fishermen knew the girl and kept an eye on her. Caleb showed her his work. He taught her how to mend nets, how to hold the needle, how to tighten the knots so they wouldn't come loose underwater. At first Isabella poked clumsily at the threads, getting tangled in them, but slowly she began to feel the rhythm. Her hands, used only to violins and books, developed their first calluses. See this fish? Caleb pointed to a silvery one in a crate. That's mullet. And this one, red mullet. Learn to tell them apart and you can help sort the catch. Isabella listened eagerly, absorbing every word. He told her about the sea, where different fish lived, the best seasons to catch them, how to predict storms by watching the seagulls. His world was nothing like hers, full of fancy restaurants and shopping malls, but it was real. One day she was helping untangle the nets after the morning haul, and Caleb said, You know, you're not what I thought. What did you think I was? Isabella lifted her head. When I first saw you, I thought, just another rich girl. Spoiled, picky. But you're not. You're not afraid to get your hands dirty. Isabella smiled. And you're not what I thought either. When I first saw you, I thought, just a harbor boy. But you're smarter than half my classmates. They laughed. It was real friendship, simple, honest, without pretense. For the first time, Isabella felt she was valued not for who her father was or how much money he had, but for who she truly was. In the evenings she came home smelling of the sea, with calluses on her hands and a happy smile on her face. Richard saw the change and rejoiced. His daughter had come back to life. But not everyone in the family shared his joy. Catherine looked at her daughter's clothing, stained with fish scales, with open disapproval. Isabella, this has to stop, she said one evening at dinner. The girl lifted her head from her plate. What has to stop? Your visits to that harbor. To that boy. To Caleb, Isabella corrected her. He has a name. To Caleb, Catherine repeated tightly. Isabella, you must understand, he's from a different world. This is just a temporary fascination. You're grateful to him, that's natural, but you shouldn't take it too far. Too far? Isabella set down her fork. We're just friends. Friendship requires equality, her mother said gently but firmly. And you two come from completely different social circles. Sooner or later, that will cause problems. What problems? Isabella's voice trembled. He gave me my hearing back. He's my friend, my real friend, not like those girls at school who only talk to me because dad is rich. Isabella, don't raise your voice at your mother, Catherine frowned. I'm not shouting. I just don't understand. Richard, who had been eating silently until now, placed his napkin on the table. Catherine, what are you talking about? The boy helped our daughter. He's good, polite, intelligent. Richard, stay out of this, she said coldly. She's my daughter, and I know what's best for her. Our daughter, he corrected gently. And I believe Caleb is an excellent example for her. He's hardworking, responsible, honest. Catherine stood up from the table. Fine. If that's the case, then we'll simply reward his family financially. Generously. And that will be the end of it. Enough of Isabella going down to those docks, smelling like fish, and spending time with. With whom? Isabella jumped to her feet, tears bursting from her eyes. With ordinary people? People who don't go to your fancy parties? Isabella. You think everything can be bought, the girl cried through sobs. You think you can just hand out money and solve everything. But you can't buy friendship. Caleb refused your money, Mom. Because he's not like that. Calm down immediately. I won't. Isabella grabbed a napkin and wiped her tears. For 4 months the best doctors in the world couldn't help me. And he did. A boy from the harbor, as you call him. And he didn't take a single dollar. Because helping mattered to him, not the money. Catherine turned pale. Richard stood and placed a hand on her shoulder. Catherine, she's right. That boy is worth more than many people in our circle. I watched him work, focused, careful, responsible. He wasn't afraid, he didn't hesitate. He took the risk because he wanted to help. And then he refused payment. He met his wife's eyes. When was the last time you saw that in our world? Catherine turned to the window. She stayed silent for a long time. Then she whispered. I'm just afraid. Afraid someone will hurt her. That her classmates will laugh at her. That? Let them laugh, Isabella said, stepping closer to her mother. I don't care. Caleb is my friend. And I won't give him up no matter what anyone says. Catherine turned to look at her daughter. She saw determination in her eyes, something that hadn't been there before. The girl had changed over these weeks, she had grown stronger, more confident. All right, her mother finally exhaled. Be friends with him. But promise me you'll be careful. I promise, Isabella said, hugging her. Catherine hugged her back, though her heart still tightened with worry. She didn't understand this friendship and hadn't fully accepted it. But she saw how happy Isabella was and chose to let it be, at least for now. From that evening on, Isabella's life transformed completely. She came to the harbor almost every day, and it became her real world, not the school with its showy luxury, but the noisy pier smelling of salt and fish, where no one pitied her or put her on a pedestal. Caleb worked from morning until night, helping his father go out to sea at dawn, mending nets, sorting the catch, selling fish. He had almost no time for schoolwork, and Isabella noticed how he struggled with his homework. Show me what you got for math, she said one day as they sat on the pier with their legs hanging over the water. Caleb pulled out a worn notebook, and Isabella gasped. The problems were done, but full of mistakes, the handwriting was wide and messy. I just don't have time to sit down and figure it out properly, he said with a shrug. I'm at sea in the morning, working all day, and by evening my brain just shuts down. Let me help you, Isabella offered. Every evening, after work. I'll explain everything you don't understand. Seriously? Caleb looked at her in surprise. Of course. You helped me. Now it's my turn. From that day on, they began studying together. Isabella brought textbooks and explained math, physics, and literature. Caleb learned quickly, he was smart, he just never had the time or the quiet to focus. Within a month his grades improved so much that his teacher even called his father to school just to praise him. And Caleb taught her something completely different. He showed her how to read the sea, how to tell a storm was coming by the color of the water, how to spot a school of fish by the way the seagulls behaved. He taught her to appreciate sunsets, not as a pretty picture for a photo, but as the end of a hard day, when you could sit down, wipe the sweat from your forehead, and look at the horizon with a sense of accomplishment. See how the sun is setting, he would say, sitting next to her on a worn crate. It's the most honest time of day. The day is over, you did everything you could. Tomorrow a new one begins, but right now you can just breathe and be glad you're alive. Isabella listened and realized there was a kind of wisdom in his words that none of her wealthy classmates had. They knew how to talk about brands, resorts, gadgets, but about life itself, real, simple, honest life, they knew nothing. One day Caleb showed her how to clean fish. Isabella wrinkled her nose at first, the slippery scales, the sharp smell, the insides. But he patiently explained every movement, and little by little she learned. Her hands, used only to violin bows, developed new calluses, her nails were no longer perfectly manicured. Catherine was horrified, but Isabella only laughed. "Mom, it's honest work. There's nothing wrong with it." And music returned. Not all at once, gradually. Isabella took her violin out of its case 2 weeks after Caleb restored her hearing. She drew the bow across the strings, and the sound amazed her. Full, rich, alive. She heard every note with both ears, felt the harmony she had been missing for 4 months. Tears came instantly. She played a Bach etude she'd learned a year before, and the music filled the room. Her father listened behind the door and cried too, his little girl was back. Now the music sounded different. Before, Isabella played correctly, technically, but coldly. Now she put into every note the things Caleb had taught her: honesty, simplicity, sincerity. Her violin teacher noticed the change and said, "I don't know what happened to you, Isabella, but you've started playing with soul. Keep going." By the end of the year, the school was preparing a big concert. Isabella was chosen as the soloist. She was to perform Vivaldi. She rehearsed every day, and one day she told Caleb, "Come to the concert. I want you to be there." Caleb hesitated. "Isabella, I don't go to your school. Everyone there is so dressed up. And all I have are one decent pair of jeans and a shirt." "I don't care what you wear," she said, taking his hand. "I'm playing for you. Understand? This concert is my thank you." And he came. In simple dark jeans, a white shirt he had clearly ironed himself, the creases were uneven. He had smoothed his hair with water, but it still stuck up stubbornly. He sat among parents in expensive suits and gowns, and Isabella saw some of them glance at him with confusion. Backstage, her classmates whispered, "Who is that? Does he even go to our school?" "No, that's Isabella's friend. Some fisherman kid from the harbor." "Seriously? And she invited him?" "Well, you know Isabella. After what happened, she's been weird." But Isabella didn't care. She walked onto the stage, lifted her violin, found Caleb in the audience. He was sitting in the 3rd row, smiling at her with that simple, open smile, and began to play. The music flowed through the hall, and the room fell into absolute silence. Isabella played with her eyes closed, pouring into each note everything she felt. Gratitude to Caleb for giving her back her hearing. Joy from the friendship that had changed her life. Love for the sea he taught her to understand. The realization that happiness wasn't in money or luxury, but in simple, honest things. When the final note faded, the hall erupted in applause. Isabella opened her eyes and saw Caleb standing and clapping, tears shining on his cheeks. Beside him stood Richard, then Catherine. Then the entire hall. After the concert, her classmates surrounded Isabella, congratulating her, admiring her. But she slipped through the crowd to Caleb, who stood off to the side, unsure if he should come closer. "Well," she asked, beaming. "That was incredible," he smiled. "I've never heard music like that live. Thank you for inviting me." "No, I should thank you," Isabella said, taking his hand right in front of everyone. "If it weren't for you, I'd never be playing again." Tiffany, Isabella's classmate, approached them, eyeing Caleb with curiosity. "Hi. Are you Isabella's friend?" "Yes," he said calmly. "Caleb. Nice to meet you. Do you go to our school?" "No, I go to a regular one. On the outskirts." "Oh," Tiffany said, her voice tinged with mild disappointment. "I see." She walked away, and Isabella noticed her whisper something to her friends. They glanced at Caleb and giggled. But Isabella didn't care. Let them whisper. Let them think she's strange. Caleb was worth more than all of them put together. 6 years passed in the blink of an eye. Isabella turned 16, Caleb, 18. Much had changed during those years, but their friendship only grew stronger. Isabella still studied at the private academy, but she had become a different person. She used to be quiet, withdrawn, afraid to express her opinions. Now she spoke directly, without hesitation, unafraid to voice what she thought. Her classmates were wary at first, then got used to it. Some even began to listen to her. At 15 she created a volunteer club at school. The idea came after she learned that many children from low-income families couldn't afford even basic school supplies. Isabella gathered a group of 10 students, and they began collecting old books, clothes, school items, and giving them to those in need. "Isabella, why do you need this?" Tiffany once asked her. "You already have enough of your own problems." "That's exactly why," Isabella replied. "I know what it feels like to need help and not get it. I don't want other kids to feel that way." The club grew to 30 members. They visited children's homes, helped at shelters, raised funds for sick children. Some classmates' parents, wealthy business owners, began donating large sums after seeing their kids' enthusiasm. Isabella became the heart of this movement, and even the school principal was proud of her. Meanwhile, Caleb finished school with top grades, thanks to Isabella's help and his own determination. He was accepted into a university on a full scholarship, majoring in ichthyology. He studied and continued to work with his father, waking at 4 in the morning, heading out to sea, returning by noon, then rushing to his classes. In the evenings he sat over his textbooks until late at night. Isabella saw how exhausted he was and tried to help. She brought notes, explained difficult topics, helped him prepare for exams. They met several times a week, sometimes at the harbor, sometimes in a cafe, sometimes just walking along the waterfront. And over those 6 years, something changed between them. What had begun as gratitude and friendship slowly grew into something more. Isabella noticed her heart beating faster when she saw Caleb. She missed him when they didn't meet. His smile made her happier, his sadness made her hurt inside. Caleb had changed too. The teenager had turned into a young man, broad-shouldered, suntanned, with strong working hands and bright, thoughtful eyes. He became more confident, yet stayed the same, honest, simple, sincere. One evening they sat on the pier, just like many years ago when everything had begun. The sun was setting, painting the sky in orange and pink shades. Isabella watched the water, Caleb watched her. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. "How much everything has changed," she smiled. "Do you remember that day? When you pulled the sponge from my ear?" "Of course I do. I was terrified," he admitted. "I thought something might go wrong, that I'd hurt your ear. My hands were shaking, though I tried not to show it." "Really?" Isabella turned to him. "I thought you were completely calm." "I know how to hide nerves. Working with fish teaches you, you can't let your hands shake." They grew quiet. The waves lapped gently against the pier, seagulls cried in the distance. "Isabella," Caleb suddenly said, "I've been wanting to tell you something. For a long time, but I didn't know how." Her heart skipped. "What is it?" He turned to her, took her hand in his calloused palms. You're not just a friend to me. Haven't been for a long time. For maybe 3 years. I kept telling myself it was foolish, that we're from different worlds, that you have your life and I have mine. But I can't stay silent anymore. I love you." Isabella froze. Her cheeks flushed, her breath caught. "I love you too," she whispered. "I've loved you for a long time. I was just afraid to say it." Caleb pulled her close and kissed her. The first kiss was awkward, hesitant, both afraid to do something wrong. But then it deepened, grew more confident. The sun sank below the horizon, bathing everything in golden light as they kissed on the old pier where their story had begun. When they finally pulled away, Isabella pressed her forehead to his and laughed through happy tears. "Did we really just do that?" "Looks like it," Caleb grinned so widely it made his cheeks hurt. "What will my parents say?" "Your father likes me. He's told me more than once, that I'm a good guy, that he's glad we're friends. But friendship is one thing, a relationship is another. Then I'll go to him and tell him directly. That I love his daughter and want to be with her." Isabella hugged him tightly. "I'm afraid my mom will be against it." "And you?" "I'm for it. With all my heart." The next day Caleb really came to their house. He wore his best suit, simple, bought with his first scholarship money, but clean and carefully ironed. He rang the doorbell, and Richard answered. "Caleb. Come in, come in. Did something happen?" "Mr. Sterling, I need to speak with you. Seriously." They sat down in the living room. Catherine came out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. She saw their guest and raised her eyebrows in surprise. Isabella stood in her doorway, unsure whether to come out. "I love your daughter," Caleb said plainly, looking Richard in the eye. "And I want to be with her. I know I'm not from your world, I don't have money or connections. But I study, I work, I have a goal in life. I will become a man worthy of her. And I will do everything I can to make Isabella happy." Richard was silent, studying the young man. Then he slowly smiled. Caleb, I saw what you were like at 12, responsible, brave, honest. And I see what you've become now, hardworking, determined, decent. You're better than many boys from our circle. If Isabella has chosen you, it means she has good judgment. You have my blessing. Catherine stood leaning against the wall, her expression unreadable. Then she walked over and sat beside Caleb. Do you really love my daughter? Yes. With all my heart. And are you ready to work, study, build a future? Yes. I'm already doing that. Catherine sighed. You know, Caleb, for 6 years I was against your friendship. I thought it was temporary, that Isabella would outgrow it. But I saw how you changed her. She became stronger, kinder, happier. You taught her to value simple things, to be honest, to help people. She took his hand. Forgive me for not accepting you for so long. You're a good person. And if my daughter loves you, I won't stand in the way. Caleb hadn't expected that. He squeezed her hand gently. Thank you. I won't disappoint you. Isabella came out of her room, ran to Caleb, and hugged him. Richard and Catherine exchanged smiles. Their little girl had grown up, and chosen someone worthy. One day Isabella stumbled upon a truth her mother had kept secret for 7 years. She was looking for old photos for a school project and climbed up to the storage shelves in her parents' bedroom. Among the boxes of albums she found a small dark wooden box. Inside were notebooks. Her mother's diaries. One of them lay open at a marked page. A date caught her eye, August, 7 years ago. That very month. Her heart tightened. She sat at the edge of the bed and began to read. August 15th. I cannot forgive myself. A week has passed, and I keep replaying that day in my head. What if I hadn't been distracted? What if I had hung up the phone and watched Isabella? Mr. Anderson, my husband's partner, called. He was talking about a contract. I was on the upper deck with the phone pressed to my ear. Isabella was below, getting ready to jump. I saw her from the corner of my eye but didn't pay attention. Then I heard a splash. I turned, she was already in the water. I waved to her and kept listening. And a minute later I saw Isabella surface too sharply and hit her shoulder on the yacht's hull. She jerked, and the mask slipped. If I hadn't been on the phone, I would have warned her. I would have shouted for her to move away from the side. The doctors say the sponge got so deep because of the impact. Because the mask slipped at that moment. It's my fault. Richard doesn't know. I can't tell him. If he finds out I was distracted, that I didn't watch her, he will never forgive me. And Isabella, my little girl, is now deaf in one ear. Because of me. Because I thought a business call was more important than her safety. I will carry this burden for the rest of my life. And I will never tell her the truth. Isabella finished reading and didn't immediately realize she was crying. Tears fell onto the pages, smudging the ink. She closed the notebook and sat there, sobbing. Her mother had blamed herself for 7 years. 7 years she had carried this weight alone. Isabella wiped her face, put the diary back, and went downstairs. Catherine was in the living room with a book. Mom, Isabella said quietly. Catherine looked up, saw her tear-streaked face, and jumped to her feet. What happened? Isabella walked over, sat beside her, and took her hands. I found your diary. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to read it, but I saw the entry about that day on the yacht. Catherine turned pale. Her lips trembled. Isabella, Mom, it was an accident, the girl said firmly. You're not guilty. I got distracted. Because of me, you lost your hearing. No. Isabella hugged her mother tightly. It just happened. You couldn't have known. Catherine broke down in tears, pressing herself to her daughter's shoulder. I thought you would hate me if you found out. I didn't know how to tell you. Mom, I never blamed you. Never. It was an accident. Richard, hearing the sobbing, rushed into the living room. Catherine? What happened? Isabella looked at her father through tears. Dad, Mom has blamed herself for 7 years for what happened to me. Richard knelt in front of his wife and cupped her face in his hands. Catherine, why didn't you tell me? Why did you carry this alone? I was afraid you'd hate me. And that Isabella would too. It was an accident. No one is guilty, Richard said and kissed her forehead. Isabella hugged her mother tighter. You know what, Mom? I'm actually grateful for that day. Catherine pulled back and stared at her in disbelief. How can you say that? Because that day led me to Caleb, Isabella said, smiling through tears. If not for the sponge, we never would have met. I would have stayed a spoiled girl. I'd never have learned what true friendship is, what honest work means. Caleb changed my life. And it all started that day. That day was a gift. and I regret nothing." Catherine embraced her daughter and burst into tears again, but now they were tears of relief. The weight she'd carried for 7 years finally fell away. Richard wrapped his arms around both of them. "I love you," Catherine whispered. "And we love you," Richard replied. "We always have, and we always will," Isabella added. A week later, Richard announced a special family dinner. He invited not only Caleb, but also his parents, his father Jack Sullivan and his mother Mary Sullivan. Catherine was nervous all day. She cooked dinner herself, fish using a recipe she had asked Mary for. She wanted to show respect for their traditions. When the guests arrived, Catherine greeted them at the door. "Please come in. I'm very glad you're here." Jack and Mary felt uncomfortable in the large house, but Richard quickly eased the atmosphere. "Please, sit down. Make yourselves at home." The first minutes passed in silence, then Richard began asking about fishing, and soon the men were deep in conversation. When the main course was served, Catherine stood and tapped her spoon against her glass. "Caleb, I want to apologize to you. Officially. In front of everyone." Caleb blinked in surprise. "For what, Mrs. Sterling?" "For my arrogance. For treating you for 7 years as someone beneath our circle. For trying to break your friendship with Isabella." Her voice trembled. "You saved my daughter. You gave her hearing back. You changed her for the better. And I looked down on you. Because you had no money, because you were from a fisherman's family. Forgive me. Please." Caleb blushed. He stood and walked over to her. "Mrs. Sterling, please don't. You were worried about your daughter, that's normal. I was never offended." "You're a good person," Catherine said and hugged him. "Thank you for everything." Isabella couldn't hold back tears. Richard wiped his eyes with a napkin. Richard rose and lifted his glass. "I have an announcement. I'm creating a scholarship fund for talented kids from fishing families, those who want an education but don't have the means. The fund will be called C*. Jack straightened, listening intently. "And the first scholarship recipient will be Caleb. The fund will cover your full tuition at the university, buy all necessary equipment, everything you need. You'll be able to focus on your studies. Do you agree?" Caleb froze. "Mr. Sterling, I can't accept." "You can. This is an investment in a future specialist. And when you succeed, you'll help other kids." "Agree." Caleb looked at his father. Jack nodded proudly. "Take it, son." "Then I accept," Caleb said, shaking Richard's hand. "Thank you. I won't let you down." Catherine walked over to Caleb and, for the first time in 7 years, smiled at him sincerely. "Welcome to our family." "Thank you for accepting me," Caleb replied. Isabella came over and took his hand. They stood together, a girl from a wealthy household and a fisherman's son. Richard raised his glass. "To family. To real values. To the truth that money isn't everything. To honesty, hard work, and love." "To family," everyone echoed, clinking glasses. Dinner continued in a warm, heartfelt atmosphere. Every boundary between the families had disappeared. Only the important things remained: respect, gratitude, and love. For years passed. Isabella turned 20, Caleb, 22. Isabella was in her 4th year at the conservatory, preparing for graduation. She played beautifully, the teachers said she had a great future, that she could perform in the best concert halls in the world. But Isabella chose a different path. She gave private music lessons, and in her free time visited orphanages and hospitals, giving free concerts. Seeing the way children's eyes lit up when they heard live music meant more to her than any grand stage or applause. Caleb finished university with honors and earned a position at a research station as a junior research assistant. At the same time, he entered a university master's program to study fish migration and the impact of climate on the marine ecosystem. He worked hard, often to the point of exhaustion, but his eyes shone. He was doing what he loved. The C* Foundation, created by Richard, fully funded his education, and Caleb was grateful for the opportunity. Their relationship was strong, built on years of friendship and mutual respect. Both families had long accepted their choice and were simply happy for them. One evening Caleb invited Isabella for a walk. He said he wanted to show her something special. They drove to the old harbor, the very place where everything had begun 13 years earlier. "Why are we here?" Isabella asked as she stepped out of the car. "You'll see," Caleb smiled mysteriously. He led her to the pier where he had once sat on a crate fixing nets. Where he first saw the little girl who could not hear out of one ear. Where he removed the sponge that changed both their lives. The sun was setting, painting the sky in orange and pink. The sea was calm, waves gently tapping the pilings. Caleb stopped, turned to her, and took her hands. "Do you remember this place?" "Of course," she smiled. "How could I forget? This is where our story started. 13 years ago, you were a 10-year-old girl who couldn't hear out of one ear. And I was a boy who thought he could help. And you did." Isabella squeezed his hands. "You changed my life." "You changed mine too," Caleb said, meeting her gaze. "You taught me to believe in myself. You showed me the world was bigger than I thought. You helped me study, become the man I am today. You became my best friend. My other half. My everything." He dropped to one knee right on the wooden pier, and Isabella gasped, covering her mouth. Caleb took a small velvet box from his pocket and opened it. Inside was a white gold ring with a diamond, not huge, but beautiful, clear, sparkling in the sunset light. "I saved for it for 2 years," he said, his voice trembling. "From my scholarship, from part-time jobs. I wanted to buy it myself, without help from our parents. I wanted you to know I can take care of you. Isabella, I love you. I've loved you since the day you trusted me. Will you marry me?" Tears streamed down her face. She nodded, unable to speak from happiness. "Yes," she finally whispered, dropping to her knees beside him. "Yes. Of course, yes." Caleb slipped the ring onto her finger, and it gleamed in the fading sunlight. They embraced and kissed on the very pier where fate had brought them together 13 years ago. "It's so beautiful," Isabella said through tears, looking at the ring. "Caleb, you didn't have to save for so long." "I did," he brushed her tears away. "It mattered to me. I wanted to show I'm worthy of you." "You've always been worthy of me," she kissed him. From that very day. They held the wedding 6 months later. Richard offered to arrange a luxurious celebration at the city's finest restaurant, invite hundreds of guests, make everything grand. But Isabella and Caleb refused. "Dad, we want a simple wedding," Isabella said. "On the beach. Only the closest people." "But honey, we don't need luxury. We want sincerity." And Richard agreed. He understood, his daughter had grown up, and her values were different from his when he was young. The ceremony took place on the beach at sunset. A small arch decorated with simple white flowers and fishing nets. Guests included only their parents, a few close friends, and the children from the orphanage where Isabella played violin. Isabella wore an elegant white dress, beautiful but not extravagant. Caleb wore a classic suit. They exchanged vows to the sound of waves, and when they were pronounced husband and wife, everyone applauded. Richard couldn't hold back tears as he hugged his daughter. "You chose a worthy man," he whispered. "I'm so proud of you." Catherine danced with Jack Sullivan, Caleb's father, and they laughed like old friends. Mary Sullivan hugged Isabella, calling her daughter. All the boundaries that once separated the two families had long disappeared. Only love and respect remained. The parents gifted the newlyweds an apartment near the sea, small, cozy, with a view of the water. Isabella and Caleb furnished it simply but tastefully. Above their bed, in a wooden frame under glass, lay the very same dark brown sponge the size of a pea. Beneath it was a small engraved plaque. "Where our happiness began." Every morning, when Isabella woke up, she looked at that frame and smiled. A tiny sponge that had slipped into her ear 13 years earlier had changed everything. It had brought pain, fear, despair. But then it had led her to Caleb. To true friendship. To love. To happiness. In the evenings they sat on the balcony, drank tea, and watched the sunset over the sea. "You know what I think?" Isabella said one evening, leaning against her husband's shoulder. "What?" Caleb wrapped his arm around her. "That the sponge wasn't an accident. It was fate. It knew we needed to meet. Maybe," he kissed the top of her head. "Or maybe it was just a sponge. But it led me to the most important thing in my life, you. And it led me to you." Isabella lifted her hand, and the diamond on her ring caught the sunset light. They sat there, wrapped in each other's arms, and they were happy. Truly happy. Because their love wasn't born from wealth or status, but from kindness, honesty, and faith in each other. Because they had learned to value what mattered most, not money, not luxury, but simple moments together, support, respect, and sincerity. And this story is a reminder that sometimes the hardest trials lead to the most beautiful things in life. That one act of kindness can change a destiny forever. And that real love knows no boundaries between worlds, it simply exists, strong and pure. Leave a like if you believe that true friendship and love have no boundaries, that one good deed can change a life forever, and that the most important thing in life isn't money, but the people who stand beside you. And before you go, take a look at the story we left here on the screen. We're sure it will make you believe in the power of human kindness and true love as well.